Hey there, it is Tuesday once more, which means it's time for another In Real Life video. This week, it's a bit of a more topical video topic, right? Topical topic. We're talking about more so current events, and more so today's current event in the news, at least in video games. As well, before we get to that, apologies if I miss any videos over the next 2 days roughly, maybe 3. Expecting some really bad weather that may knock out internet or power for an extended period of time, if not worse. Already, some of that has happened in other parts of the country. It's been pretty bad. If you're sort of in the, in the area for being affected by this as I am, be careful, try and stay safe and all that. Anyway, speaking somewhat of staying safe in a different sort of way, today, just recently, in fact, as of when I'm recording this, it has come out that Microsoft, of course, who now owns all of Bethesda, as well as now ABK, Activision Blizzard King, they closed down a few studios, as well as made some changes to their docket, in a very kind of surprising turn of events, right? Surprising in some ways, but not so surprising in others, I suppose. But all of this is to say, man, you really just cannot trust these folks whatsoever, which I think is maybe we're like preaching to the choir here. I think at least on this channel, I feel like most people who watch this are aware, like, yeah, we approach this with some degree of trepidation ever since they bought out a lot of our favorite studios and developers and stuff like that. But suffice it to say, recently, and this is not the first time we've talked about this, but previously, I believe it was entirely layoffs, right? Which happens very frequently and very often whenever studios are acquired by these sort of mega corporations that sort of own a whole bunch of other companies underneath them, right? But this time, it is straight-up studio closures. Microsoft closed down Arcane Austin, who recently did Redfall. But also before that, did the new Prey game, right? They developed that, which was received significantly better than Redfall. But make no mistake, they're closed down entirely, not even rolled up into something else, not even layoffs, but just completely shut down. Really wild. Also, now this one's a real kicker, I think, as well. Shut down Tango Gameworks. If you're unfamiliar, they were also owned under the sort of Bethesda publishing parent company, right? ZeniMax beforehand, before the buyout a few years ago. But Tango Gameworks recently put out Hi-Fi Rush, a sort of like action-adventure rhythm-focused game, right, where the entire game world, including like enemies and boss fights and stuff, is sort of moving to the beat of the music. And that had amazing critical reception. A lot of people very much enjoyed it. However, it unfortunately did not quite find as many sales, I guess, as they were hoping. But still, rumor was, I believe at the time, that Microsoft was still quite pleased with it and were planning to further invest in Tango Gameworks. Before Hi-Fi Rush, they had done The Evil Within 1 and 2. But yeah, they are completely now gutted. They're completely shut down, closed down. Pretty wild. I think, well, we'll just cover the rest of these. Lesser studios that I don't know about. Lesser in that sense. Alpha Dog Games, who apparently did the Mighty Doom mobile game. They've also apparently been shut down in the wake of this. And Roundhouse Studios has also been fully absorbed. This is actually the one that's not a closure. Have been fully absorbed into ZOS, ZeniMax Online Studios, the same folks who do Elder Scrolls Online. And they're working on some other sort of MMO project that we don't really know too much about. Maybe we'll learn later this year. But a lot of this is set up for like points of comparison in how this has played out in the past differently and how it plays out now that all these studios have been bought out by Microsoft, by this massive super conglomeration, right? Beforehand, they were owned by ZeniMax, right? By they were like operated. They're technically Bethesda development studios. They're not Bethesda game studios, the folks who make like, Fallout, Starfield, Elder Scrolls. It's not them, but we're talking about the next level up. But suffice to say, I want to loop back to sort of Tango Gameworks, right? At first blush, if you're not very privy to like being empathetic towards the situation of these people, getting closed down and losing their jobs and whatnot, that in and of itself, of course, is horrible, right? Whenever that happens, regardless of whether or not the most recent game was a hit, like right in the case of Arcane Austin, sure, Redfall launched with a ton of issues and was generally ill-received and has remarkably low player base. But before that, they did Prey, right? They did Prey, which was still really good. I think a lot of people were under the impression that after they moved away from Redfall, I believe there was talk that they were kind of shoehorned into running with a live service project, and it just didn't work out. And then ultimately, it kind of just snowballed into an even worse situation, as we can see. But a lot of people, myself included, were under the assumption that after they got done with Redfall and they cleaned up all of that like stuff after the launch, they would move on to something else, right? Maybe do another Prey game or some other sort of single-player immersive sim. That, however, is not the case. More so in line with Tango Gameworks, wherein you have a sort of really critical darling, right? Which isn't to say that there aren't non-critics who enjoy the game, right? Certainly they exist. There are plenty of people who enjoyed it and played it. But it just hasn't sold as well as you would hope or think, right? At the time, a lot of folks were purporting and saying and believing that something like the Game Pass, Xbox's Game Pass, would be doing well enough to, sort of absorb any issues with a game like that not selling, because the expectation was Game Pass sales would cover it, right? Game Pass subscription fees would go up for people playing this game, and so on and so forth. But clearly that is not the case. It was not able to blanket that. Instead, I guess all of their excess money went to acquiring Activision Blizzard King and all of the various legal fees involved there, right? That's pretty cool. Pretty cool that it all went there, right? See, it works in multiple ways being owned by these enormous companies, right? True enough, there's a possibility that you could be afforded some degree of shelter from it, but if they want, they could take all of that, I don't even know if you would call it goodwill, but they could take all of that and just shove it to something else, to greener pastures, as it were. They would give up on any potential future that your studio may have, as it turns out. But in this case, like I said, Hi-Fi Rush generally lauded as being a pretty dang good game, right? It showed up and won several awards at various award shows, right? I very much remember it showing up and at least getting one award at last year's Game Awards at the end of the year. But regardless, as neither here nor there, because they were shut down. Now, I think one interesting point of comparison is, and sort of a boon for trying to resist taking the buyout money and instead remaining independent, which I remember, what's his name? Sven of Larian fame and Baldur's Gate 3, of course, was recently sort of, maybe not recently, but a month or two ago, was in the news for saying, or sort of talking up sort of the advantages and, I don't know, just the idea of enjoying Larian still being independent, right? Obviously, they went with an early access route wherein they got money from customers early and whatnot. I don't know if they did, but took investment money from some other part, but were not entirely bought out and are not owned by anyone other than themselves. Or at least predominantly owned by themselves, I should say. But Sven was just recently talking up all this, saying how nice it is to be able to do as such. And I cannot help but be reminded of last year, my favorite game, who is in a similar situation as Tango Gameworks was, or is or was, I don't know. But they are still predominantly privately owned. That being Remedy Studios, folks who have done Max Payne 1 and 2 way back in the day. A lot of people conflate that it was always Rockstar behind it. No, it was Remedy who did the first two. It was Rockstar that eventually bought it and did Max Payne 3. But regardless, Remedy was there for that. Therefore, Control, and most recently, Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 has a very similar story to Tango Gameworks and Hi-Fi Rush, in that Alan Wake 2, critical darling, right? Lot 1, like I said, same with Tango and Hi-Fi Rush, showed up at multiple award ceremonies for games and media and whatnot, and picked up multiple prestigious awards. However, also similar to Hi-Fi Rush, has also been in the news for not selling terribly well. Personally, I absolutely love Alan Wake 2, and I'm so excited for the DLC. And you notice there the big difference here between this and something as well like Arcane and Redfall, which had all of its plans for DLC recently scrapped with their closure. Supposed to be like refunds or something for people who bought those editions or like season pass or whatever. But Alan Wake 2, like I said, hasn't sold as well as they would like. However, they're still able to continue and subsist and continue going on. They have plans for future games that are still in work and are still coming up, right? They've got like a sort of 4-player co-op game. They, of course, have Control 2 around the horizon a little bit further out. They've got remakes for Max Payne 1 and 2 that are planned. And, of course, they've even mentioned that they have more plans for Alan Wake in some way or another, which I'm incredibly excited for, even beyond the DLC that I mentioned. But the big difference here is that they're still independent, effectively, right? They're technically an indie studio, right? But by virtue of being independent and not owned by some sort of massive publisher like Microsoft, like Sony. So they don't have to worry about that. Instead, what they can do is sort of think, oh, we can think about this long term, which they have been in the news sort of remarking, right? And goodness, being a Let's Play channel who sort of thrives on the same notion, they have said that as time goes on, they think that they'll recoup their losses, because they still, about 6 months out, after 6 months plus maybe, after the game has come out, they still haven't recouped development costs for it, but they anticipate that the game will have a long tail and that investment and all the time and effort and work will pay off, right? And true enough, I suspect that as games like Project Condor, their multiplayer one, and Control 2 come out, given the fact that they're all tied together, sales of that will, of course, bump up sales of a game like Alan Wake 2, because people will want to see all of this connected universe stuff, right? Especially if it's done really well, right? They've put faith in their talent and creative forces that they'll be able to deliver and make it happen, right? They don't need to answer to the beck and call of like the shareholders, like the investment class, as it were. They don't need to worry about it quite as much because they are still private in that sense. In this case, however, a big corporation like Microsoft, like I said, it goes both ways with them being able to utilize other studios as ways to make their numbers go up, right? If you aren't making their numbers go up by way of sales, they can make them go up by way of getting rid of you and cutting costs, right? So long as they stay in the green and keep going up in their earnings calls, that's kind of all that matters, right? It's very obvious now that, you know, when things aren't looking good, they've got all these vectors from which they can pull. A company like Microsoft, they can just cut you, right? They can cut you out of there, close you down, and make their stuff look better in that way, right? You are simply just another device that they are wielding. They have no interest in your creative output or interest in, like, your long-term goals because, well, they may have interest in that, right? To be even generous to them, right? They may have interest in that, right? They may even claim so. The higher-ups may say, like, yeah, we do. We're very sorry about this. We do have interest in it, but it doesn't matter how much they say that because at the forefront, they answer to the beck and call of these shareholders, of the investors. If the line ain't going up, that's all that matters at the end of the day, isn't it? Whether or not someone is producing a creative work of interest or value, whether or not they think it will pay off in the long term, like I said, in the case of Alan Wake 2, they're expecting it to do well over time. It's worth it for them to have it out there. Even in that case, Remedy took a huge investment from Epic Game Studios, from Epic, or not even Game Studios, I think Epic Publishing, which is why Alan Wake 2 launched exclusively on, at least on PC, on that platform, on Epic's platform. But they took, I believe, Epic like funded the entirety, if not close to it, of that game. So in that case, you know, they had a good eye for the future. Now, another situation we mentioned earlier, this one hits even more close to home, not for me on a personal level, because I really, like I said, I've really, really enjoyed Alan Wake 2. Hey, listen, Alan Wake 2 didn't sell too well. If you're interested in a cool, very, very fun narrative game, check it out. But that's neither here nor there. ZeniMax Online Studios, we mentioned this just recently. And mind you, they are also owned by Microsoft now. They were just recently in the news, given the 10-year anniversary of Elder Scrolls Online, right? Now, if we think back, Elder Scrolls Online didn't launch with much amazing popularity. It wasn't blowing stuff out of the water. Even to this day, right? It's kind of, I would say, maybe the third place MMO RPG of current day, right? As far as things that are talked about and brought up in the zeitgeist, right? I would probably say, obviously, World of Warcraft has been at the top, and I think remains at the top, and probably will continue to do so for ages and ages. But then Final Fantasy XIV, I think, is right beneath it, and then ESO is right there. Always consistently kind of doing comfortably, right? Not breaking any glass ceilings, as it were, but doing well enough. However, they mentioned in interviews, like I said, for their anniversary, just not too far away, they were talking about how the game launched in a certain state and wasn't doing terribly well. And this was, of course, before the buyout, when their CEO, Robert Altman, was still in charge of things. And sort of the leadership of ZOS, ZeniMax Online Studios, had conversations with him, and they have expressed, in fact, a lot of people at these studios owned by ZeniMax, owned by Bethesda Publishing and whatnot, have expressed, like, yeah, he was a pretty decent CEO in that he kind of cared about the product and was willing to see it through rather than making short-term gains and shorter-term changes for shorter-term, like, windfalls of cash, right, is what I generally have heard. And in this case, he gave them, they were given resources and time to sort of build up Elder Scrolls Online, right? Keep working on it. And true enough, they keep doing it, right? The game keeps getting regular updates and expansions, right? They've talked about how many players they've had over the years, how much money the game has made for the company and whatnot. Generally speaking, they've been afforded time to sort of work on and invest in this, right? They are allowed to take this long-term approach because, at the time at least, they weren't answering to this sort of short-term I don't know, you need to make the line go up. We need to stay in the green. We need to make not only stay in the green, but advance further higher up, right? Otherwise, we can accomplish that by cutting costs. And how do we cut costs? We cut you. Now, I have to wonder if such a thing is possible after the buyout, right? I cannot help but worry, if any of these studios puts out something that isn't quite up to snuff, are we now liable to see them get gutted? I have to wonder how much like IP and stuff protects someone. In the case of BGS, Bethesda Game Studios, I would at most see them getting hit with layoffs, right? Maybe the darkest situation would be them getting layoffs, maybe one of their studios closed. If something like, if Starfield didn't sell well, right? Regardless of public perception and all of that of Starfield, it has purportedly sold very well. It's like either Microsoft's most or second most selling game. And in a situation where that isn't the case, are they how fucked are they, right? In a situation where Elder Scrolls 6 somehow, I don't think this will be the case. I think even if Elder Scrolls 6 is a horrible game, it will sell well. But in a situation where that happens, how screwed are they, right? You've got other companies sort of taking risks on newer stuff, right? I cannot help but think of Machine Games. Made some really dope Wolfenstein games in the past. What if this Indiana Jones game comes out, doesn't do well? Are they next up on the cutting block? I would think so. I think we should expect that if they don't do well, they're going to start looking at them, right? When yearly or quarterly earnings calls come time to be talked about, come up, you have to start thinking who's on the fucking chopping block. Just as well, speaking of sort of venerable first-person shooters, id and Doom, right? They are purportedly, they finished up the Doom Eternal, Doom 2016 little arc. We don't fully know exactly what they're working on next. I've heard people say that it's going to be another Doom story or something like that, another series of Doom games in a different way. But we do not know. If they take a risk and go out and try something different, what will happen, right? Similarly, in the past, we had heard talk of wherein, Game Pass can be leveraged to sort of get more small projects from studios. And true enough, it sounded like that was the case, right? In the case of Obsidian and Pentiment and Grounded, right? These are games which seem very unlikely to have been made otherwise because they're such odd little projects. Absolutely love both of them. Have a playthrough of Pentiment on the channel, in fact. Very good, very, very fantastic narrative game. But I have to wonder, as it stands now, it does not sound like they're interested in running with a Pentiment, right? Something like that doesn't sound like it's in the cards for them. They're more interested in sort of going with that usual route of having a bigger, developing their IP, rather than having little spin-off projects that are a risk. They would much rather have something that's a more surefire bet, right? I don't know. It's very worrying. Certainly, this is stuff that we have known about for a long time. Like I said, back when they got acquired, back when there were the layoffs and all of that, we talked about this, how it's, like I said, a big concern. I don't know. Like I said, I feel as if I'm preaching to the choir here. I feel like a lot of folks watching this are already very staunchly aware, right? But I don't know. How do you talk about something other than this, right, when it goes down? Especially when it hits so close to home, I think. Like I said, the sort of benefits of seeing these companies, these development studios that are still privately owned, right? Obviously, Larian and Baldur's Gate have had like a runaway success, but I think the real situation to look at here as a point of comparison is, like I said, Remedy and Alan Wake 2, who have had a situation that's remarkably similar to Tango Gameworks, and that there's Alan Wake 2 is a critical darling, very well received. So many people love the game, but there's ultimately not enough sales to recoup the losses as of yet. But like I said, they're willing to take the long road with that because they see that investing in it and investing in that sort of, not necessarily even investing monetarily, but investing their time and creative work inside of their like connected universe, their Remedyverse and all that, will pay off in the long run, right? They can afford to sort of take that like creative risk, you know, whereas if you're owned by this super corporation, depending on which way the wind is blowing, they may or may not be interested in that, you know? Well, I suppose that's it. Like I said, not much of a takeaway here. I think most folks watching this channel are already very aware of what the hell is up. And if anything, I'm grateful for the fact that it seems like so many of us here are on the same page in that way. Very grateful for that, to have such a, like, I don't know, on the level audience, as it were. But like I said, I felt like I couldn't talk about anything else this week aside from that, because it is a lot of the hubbub. There was also the stuff with Helldivers and Sony, which was pretty wild as well, how that all played out. That might be worth talking about later. But like I said, expecting some very, very inclement weather, which may interrupt recording. So kind of wanted to get this one done and shipped out the window. Until next time, please take care of each other.